Going to move on to supply, and I have two questions lined up for supply, just like I had for demand. The first of these is going to look at which way it would shift supply. Pretty simple as that. And then the second will look at what we should expect that shifts like that to do to the price and quantity. So we'll need to look at the whole market. So that's what we're going to do now, starting with number 10. Consider the market for paper-bound economics textbooks. Those were the days. Explain whether the following events would cause an increase or a decrease in supply or an increase or decrease in the quantity supplied. The market price of paper increases. Of our determinants of, let's say, supply and demand. Paper and textbooks. What's the relationship of, now this specifically, one could think of paper that you might be doing your assignments on, but the author is really implying the paper that's used to print the paper textbook, which is what this is, a copy of right here. That's an input, right? And the paper price increased, so the input increased. It's under supply. Is that going to increase or decrease the supply of the paper-bound textbooks? It would decrease the supply of the paper-bound textbooks. How about letter B? The market price for economics textbooks increases. The market price of economics textbooks increases, and the good we're talking about is paper-bound economics textbooks. So is this going to increase or decrease supply? No. This is a change in the quantity supplied. This is a reference to moving along the supply curve, not shifting the supply curve. So what we're talking about, just focusing on supply. Supply is upward sloping, and this good has seen, let me look at it again. The market price of economics textbooks increases. So they used to be like this price, and the sellers were willing and able to sell this many, and then the price that they could get went up to, let's say, this price, and now the quantity supplied that the sellers are willing and able to sell, I should do the same notation, is this many. So if you think, well, when price goes up, supply goes up, this is what you mean. But what you need to say, until you have it down pat, until you're a commentator on CNBC, then you can say it wrong. You need to say, no, when price goes up, the quantity supplied goes up, because that's talking about movement of along the supply curve, not movement of the supply curve, which is a different creature and has different meanings for what we're doing here. So that's an increase in the quantity supplied. Letter C, the number of publishers of textbooks, economics textbooks increases. Well, that's pretty straightforward. We're talking about supply. We know that. And the publishers is another word for sellers when we're talking about textbooks. So it's an increase in the number of sellers. So that's an increase in supply. Letter D, publishers expect that the market price of economics textbooks will increase next month. Publishers expect. We're under supply. They expect it to be able to sell for more next month. Well, if you sell something regularly and you expect that you can get more for it in the future, do you want to get rid of what you have now? No, you want to hold on to it so you can sell it at that higher price in the future. So that would decrease supply now. The expectation, make sure I'm in the right direction. Expected market price of economics textbook will increase, yes. The expectation of greater future prices decreases supply in the present because they want to still have it on hand in their inventory to sell it later at those greater prices. So that is number 10. Let's move on to number 11. Consider the market for smartphones. Explain whether the following events would cause an increase or a decrease in supply or an increase or a decrease in the quantity supplied. Illustrate each and show, this one says show, I like that, what would happen to the equilibrium quantity and the market price. So before I even start reading this, let me just set up a framework. That's the first step. Price goes on the vertical axis, quantity on the horizontal axis, upward sloping supply, downward sloping demand. equilibrium price and quantity identified. And we're talking about, so I label this smartphones, SP for smartphones. There's my market before anything has happened, okay? Now events happen. The price of touch screens used in smartphones declines. Okay, now of these determinants up here, the relationship between the screen that's in our phone is made by, usually outsourced, I think, to another company other than LG or Apple. They contract that out, then they buy those screens, they put them in the device. That's an input. Okay, we already knew it was under supply the way the question was organized, but that's under supply, and the input got cheaper. If the input got cheaper, what's that going to do to supply? It's going to increase supply. So step 1 was to set it up. Step 2 is to identify the determinant. Step 3 is to say under what and which direction. And then step 4 is to draw it in. Step 4 with supply is very often done incorrectly. This is an increase in supply. If you're looking at that going, no, man, that's a decrease. You got it backwards. Don't fall for the Jedi mind trick. Even if I drew this line like this, that is still an increase in supply. Because what we're saying is, for each price, the quantity has gone up. So this is an increase in supply. All right, and I didn't mean to make it not parallel. It's just a sketch. But for our purposes, it's okay to be a little inaccurate like that in our drawing ability. This is not a test of our drawing ability. So this is an increase in supply. And the result of that is that more phones will be bought and sold, and the price of the phones should come down. That's why lower input prices are good for consumers right there. So that's what we could expect to be the outcome for letter A. Outcomes. Then letter B, the price of machinery used to produce smartphones increases. Okay. The machinery used to produce smartphones, the way I have this laid out, one might jump to technology, or we could say input prices, and either one works just fine, right? So let me set up my framework. This was letter A. Now we're on letter B. There's the price. This is just identifying what we're doing here. There's the quantity, supply, demand, P star, Q star. And now we're saying that the price of the machinery to make this good has gotten more expensive. Well, whether you think of that as technology or an input, it's more expensive. What's that going to do to the supply curve? It's going to decrease supply. So my supply curve, I'm going to make a neater S. My supply is going to decrease. This is a decrease in supply. I know people want to fall prey to thinking that's an increase in supply, but it is not. That is a decrease in supply because this quantity right here has moved to there. And this quantity right here has moved to there. And this quantity right here has moved to there. It is left, a decrease of supply is a left shift. An increase in supply is a right shift. This is a decrease in supply. Now it's easier to see if I draw it like that, but it's the same line. I didn't erase anything down here. I only erased this little piece of it. Okay, now I'm erasing that. See? It's the same line. So that is a decrease in supply, and it's important to get that right because if you get that wrong, then you get the other part wrong too, which is the whole ball of wax, which is what does it do to price and quantity? Well, the new equilibrium price is higher, and consequentially, less will be bought. So that, now, let's use this as a chance to illustrate this important point. This decrease in supply has caused a decrease in the quantity demanded. So going back to those questions, the difference between a change in demand and a change in quantity demanded, this is a change in quantity demanded. Because supply has gone down, price has gone up. Because price has gone up, the quantity demanded along that demand curve has gone down. So when you hear people say prices are up so demand is down, that's what that really is saying. Prices are up because the supply has fallen, and indeed there's an effect on demand, but it's a decrease in the quantity demanded right along the demand curve, because the demand curve always tells us how much people are willing and able to buy at various prices. New prices, different quantity, that's changing the quantity demanded. So that's letter B and a whole lot more. It's circling back to what we were saying about demand. I think here's the easier place to see that distinction between a change in demand and a change in quantity demanded. Let's do letter C. The number of manufacturers of smartphones increases. Number of manufacturers sounds like number of sellers. Of course it's under supply, because this whole question is under supply. And the number of them increased. Greater supply or lesser supply? Greater supply. More supply is already pictured right here, so this is not just letter A, this is also letter C. It should look like this, and that would increase the quantity that consumers are willing and able to buy right along there. That's change in demand, change in quantity demanded right along there. And that would push down on the price. So the quantity goes up, the price goes down. That's what would happen with letter C. Letter D. There is a decrease in the market demand for smartphones. Well, if there's a decrease in demand, let's just draw it in. The author doesn't give us why. Might have. But let's just start a new framework up here for letter D. Supply curve, there's demand, my initial equilibrium, and now the author says there is a decrease in the market demand. I want to make sure I get my direction right. These are smartphones still. Drawing a decrease in demand, and what does that mean? Does that change supply? No. Is there a supply aspect to this? Oh, sure. It's right along the curve. Now, with lesser demand, people are, for this quantity here, people are willing and able to pay less. Or with lesser demand, for a given quantity, they're willing to pay less at any given quantity. Or for a given price, they're willing to buy less. All those things are what lesser demand means. I put the wrong mark here, sorry. I meant a hashtag there. So this is a decrease in quantity right here. And so if somebody's thinking, oh, lower prices mean lesser supply, that's already picked up in our drawing right here. This is a decrease in the quantity supplied because it's movement along the supply curve. Because with lesser demand, the price they can get falls. With lower prices, they supply less, and that is a change in the quantity supplied right there. So that is the answer to D, is that there's a change in the quantity supplied. Not a change in supply. And so these are the outcomes we should expect: lesser price and lower quantity supplied. So that's a lot of information. Hope it makes some sense.